Hello, my name is Kazuki Watanabe. I'm from Sasazuka Collective in Tokyo, and also I'm a postgraduate student at the University of Tokyo majoring in philosophy. I'm having a presentation on Sakae Osugi, who is a very influential Japanese anarchist philosopher in 20th century Japan, and I will talk about his philosophy and his life. So first, who is Sakae Osugi? He is an anarchist, activist, philosopher, and translator in 20th century Japan. He published many articles on anarchism, syndicalism, and Japanese politics, and also biology. But in the end, he was assassinated by Japanese military police in 1923. We'll see this soon. Anyway, here's his picture with his daughter. So his early life. His father was a bona fide soldier, surprisingly, and he was influenced by his father. So he entered cadet school, but he was so fed up with the oppressive atmosphere of the school. And he said in the school, he cultivated his lifelong rebellious spirit. And he made various kinds of problems in the school, and in the end he was discharged from school due to a knife fight. After he was discharged from cadet school, he entered Tokyo University of Foreign Language where he learned French. When he was a student there, he encountered socialism during the war between Japan and Russia, when Japanese people were extremely patriotic. He met Kotoku Shusui, who introduced socialism and anarchism to Japan. He was a kind of pioneer of anarchism in Japan. Also, he wrote one of the earliest books on imperialism. Interacted with Kotoku and other socialists, Osugi became a very active socialist. And he was arrested for the first time while leading the protest against raising train fares. In the first prison, he mastered Esperanto. Since then, he followed the maxim of one language per prison. He was a kind of linguistic genius and he was very good at language in general. So he was also a very famous translator at the time. He published the first Japanese translation of Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species. Anyway, for these convictions, he had to spend 2.5 years in prison, during which he passionately read books on evolutionary theory and anarchism, importantly. After he got out of the prison, he started publishing a magazine in which socialists wrote a lot of articles on anarchism and socialism and Japanese politics. However, Japanese socialists had to experience so-called winter of socialism. Kotoku, who had been Osugi's comrade and teacher, was executed with 11 socialists. They were all innocent but convicted for crimes against emperor because the Japanese government wanted to eliminate them. Osugi luckily avoided the forced church because he was already in prison. So, after this incident, Japanese socialists were intimidated, so they stopped labor actions or like publishing stuff. They were all intimidated, but Osugi never was intimidated. So here's a kind of one notable incident in his private life. Although he was married, he also dated journalist Ichiko Kamichika and also fell in love with Noe Ito, who is a pioneer of anarcho-feminist philosophy. And he loved Noe so much. Anyway, Noe Ito's works are still read in Japan. Her works are very important. Though using free love to justify these affairs, Osugi ended up being stabbed by Kamichika, one of his lovers, but luckily survived. After the incident, Osugi lost many friends and comrades and supporters. but he was still passionate about actions. So he fled Japan to meet anarchists overseas. In particular, he wanted to meet Nestor Makuno from Ukraine, who was in France at the time. But before participating in the international anarchist meeting, he gave a speech for May Day in Saint Denis and was arrested there. He was sent back to Japan right before there was a major earthquake in Tokyo. During the chaos of the earthquake, he was suddenly and secretly arrested by military police with his wife and 6-year-old nephew. And they were all massacred in the basement of MP headquarters. MP used the chaotic situation during the earthquake to assassinate him. So, what happened after his death? His comrades, such as Tetsu Nakahama and Daijiro Furuta, tried to avenge him. Their group, named Guillotine Society, blackmailed the rich to get the fund for their terror attack against MP, though they never earnestly prepared for that. However, they were both executed in 1925. Anyway, there's a recent film on Nakahama and Furuta called The Chrysanthemum and the Guillotine. And in the film, there was an impressive scene, Nakahama saying, "Now's the time to do it. It's now or never," to Furuta. And Furuta will say that later in the film to Nakahama. So I move on to his philosophy. I will talk about his philosophy based on his perfectionism. So I'm saying that his philosophy is based on his special perfectionism. Based on this perfectionism, he presented his genealogy of modernity and also his theory of extrication of ego, which is needed for perfection, and also moral volitionism, syndicalism, and anarchism. So, first, the basis of philosophy, namely his perfectionism. This is called the growth satisfaction of life theory. He says, as an ego, we instinctively strive for the growth satisfaction of life, in a state of which we can feel our powers, growth, and satisfaction. And here's a quote from him: "The growth satisfaction of life is the fundamental nature of life itself. Since its origin, mankind has been struggling with and using its surroundings for the purpose of growth satisfaction of its life." So he's saying our natural and normative purpose of our lives is the growth satisfaction of our lives. So this is classified as perfectionism theory. This perfectionism is the basis of his moral and political philosophy. Like, labor action is an expression of growth satisfaction, according to Osugi. And also, anarchism is the politics of perfection. With this perfectionism, he presents his genealogy of modern society. So, what happened to our modern society? Human history is the history of subjection in which one class subjugates another. Social institutions such as legal systems, political systems, and morality were inventions for stabilizing a class structure. Slaves being slaves are advantageous for masters, and morality is making ourselves slave. Here's a quote: "Law often oppresses us, morality always does." And importantly, modernity is the peak of this subjection structure. We are on top of this subjection class structure. So what happened to us? In a class society and in this subjection structure, we are all alienated from our perfection, according to Osugi. One serious issue Osugi presents is that we possess the slavish nature, and by which we behave in a way that is advantageous for masters or class society. For example, he raises the intellectual's contempt for workers, which was widely seen in 20th century socialism. This kind of contempt is just advantageous for masters in a class society because it prevents those intellectuals and workers from uniting. So, what should we do? Here's the issue. Slavish nature planted in class society, most of our nature and emotions, which seem central to our ego, are the production of slavish nature. So it follows we cannot simply rely on our ego. So he's presenting this problem as the problem of naive individualism. So what should we do? How to overcome this natural alienation from our perfection? He's saying that on top of everything we think of us ourselves, we have to undergo a more rigorous, especially sociological analysis in this section, and the so-called ego must shed its skin layer by layer until it returns to zero. So we need extrication of the ego via analysis and practice. Firstly, the way out is analysis. He did it by publishing many articles in magazines. By doing this, we have to understand our subjective situation, and also we have to execute self analysis and reflection of emotion. Like he did analysis of intellectuals' emotion. Secondly, we need practice, namely direct action. We need political action, labor movement, like strike, and interaction with various activists. These direct actions are needed to overcome our natural alienation from our perfection. So let's move back to perfectionism itself. Generally speaking, perfectionism has been criticized for its individualism and elitism. Perfectionist philosophers such as Emerson and Nietzsche indeed seem to be elitist and anti-political. We can refer to their perfectionism as artist perfectionism, in which the paradigm of perfection is an artist independent of people and politics. If we hear perfectionism and if we feel cautious against it, it's right because perfectionism is indeed an elitist theory. But fortunately, Osugi's perfectionism is not elitist but syndicalist. He held that in modernity, when the class oppression is maximized, the real perfection is achieved by workers' unity and rebellion. Here's a quote from him: where there is no effort and struggle, there is no true development of the ego. We have found the greatest of these efforts and struggles in movements of the anarchist and syndicalist. Their watchword is unity and rebellion. So he's saying we can achieve the true development of the ego in modern world only by uniting together and acting against the class structure. So this is not an elitist or purely individualist, but it's more like syndicalist and also leftist. So we have seen that his perfectionism is not elitist or purely individualist, but it's more like worker perfectionism. It necessarily involves our unity and fight. Also, his worker perfectionism implies the rejection of the parliamentary democracy or Communist Party's regime and utopian optimism in which we simply rely on some kind of outside authority or ideology. Rather, we are required the direct action here and now. Direct unity, direct politics, and direct agitation are required in his worker perfectionism. At the time, almost all Marxists and socialists were intimidated by the oppressive Japanese empire, but Osugi continued his direct actions until he was assassinated. So he practiced his own work of perfectionism by his life. Here's the quote I like. In order to taste the joy of life, in order to attain the real satisfaction of the ego, in order to climb the highest peak of life, I would like to insist on the theory of sane insanity. It doesn't matter how many times you fall. I don't care how many times we fall down. I just want to get there as many times as I can. I just want to make an effort to get there. So even if we fail many times again and again, we should have the direct action here and now repeatedly. I mean, this is the consequence of his work of perfectionism, which is illuminative and alluring for me. So, final quote from him: I foresee the supreme beauty of life in the expansion of life, see the supreme beauty of life today only in rebellion and destruction. Today, when the fact of subjection has reached its peak, conformity is no longer beauty. Beauty is only in deviancy. Conformity is force. The truth is only in deviancy. Quote from his The Growth Satisfaction of Life article. So, we have seen Osugi's perfectionism and anarchism. Now we can think about our own situation. I think the fact of subjection that Osugi has found in modernity is still augmenting. The class structure and the slavish nature to accept it is being strengthened. People are subjugated to power by technology like SNS or whatever. These prevent our growth satisfaction of lives for sure. So here's our situation now. What we can learn from Osugi. According to Osugi, what we need is direct action here and now, like publishing our analysis, uniting with comrades wherever they are, and direct protests against the subjection. We need these direct action here and now. There's no right time to wait for. We shouldn't wait for the right time, which doesn't exist. We shouldn't wait because we are in a corona crisis or whatever. I think the idea that now's the time to do it, it's now or never, is important. Osugi's perfectionism and anarchism shows that anarchism is based on individual freedom, of course, but necessarily directed to unity and rebellion now. So just we should do it here and now. We can do it. Thank you for listening. Let us all unite and rebel. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome back. We're just going to have a short Q&A with Kazuki and Atsuki of the Sasazuka, again, the right collective out of Tokyo. You prepared that lovely presentation for us. Thank you both for coming along. How are you both?
Yeah, I'm fine. A bit nervous about this, but still, I'm really happy to be here and to present to do my presentation, and also it's a great honor to um have this Q&A session. Thank you. Is it okay? Oh, sorry, Atsuki. Um, he doesn't speak English.
Ah, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
So,
feel free
sorry.
to side panel, and if you want to ask Asuki anything with the questions. We've only got a short time, so I will just crack on. But feel free to take a moment out. Uh, so the first thing that comes up is Asugi. Asugi is like the principal anarchist in Japanese history. Why is that? And are there any others that people should be looking up?
Um, I think the reason for that is he is theoretically the best anarchist philosopher in the Japanese history. He published enormous amount of books and writings, and which is really high level in, I mean, in terms of philosophical level. So that's why I think he is the most famous one. And also, I think it's because he his life is very dramatic. Yeah. So those two reasons I think answer.
他に注目すべきものとかあるって。
他に注目すべきfor Japanese anarchists?
そうそう。
Yeah, I think Kotoku Shusui, who is introduced in the presentation, is also very notable in Japan. He is a kind of teacher of Osugi. Yeah.
I'm not. It's certainly one that in Western anarchism we have a tendency not to study anarchists from around the world, unfortunately. So I think it's really interesting that more people should learn. I'm just wondering, how much relevance do you think he has to modern day issues and ongoing situations, such as in Japan? There's a resurgence in the nationalism, and corporatism is very powerful in Japan. So, what lessons can we be taking to try and take anarchism to the streets and promote individuality and individualism?
Yeah. I think the structure he analyzed in his writings, I mean, the structure of Japanese society he analyzed is still ongoing, and in in that sense, his analysis and philosophy are very applicable to these days. And also, but the problem with him is about his view of women or gender issue. So besides those free love problems, I think Osuri is still applicable to Japanese society, and his analysis is very very remarkable, and yeah, I learned a lot from him.
Okay. So quickly before we run out of time, there's a few questions about what's the current state of anarchism in Japan? Is there much of a movement at all? And if so, like, is it mostly in Tokyo and Kyoto and the big cities, or is there yeah.
Yeah, I think I should ask Atsuki. 中西、日本でアナーキズムって今、東京がどういう運動をしてる今一番なんかアナーキズムやってるのってどこ？
やっぱり、大阪の釜ヶ崎のグループが、多分、一番ここ最近では盛り上がったグループで、具体的に、日雇い労働者が、なんかこう、集まる、センターでみんな野宿をしてたんだけど、その建物を潰すっていう時に、1ヶ月弱オキュパイした。それが多分一番盛り上がった運動だ。
So we think the most notable anarchism movement in Japan is in Osaka, and which is called Kamagasaki, and there a lot of anarchists and workers moved against the destruction of the center and place for 日雇い労働者ってなんていう？日雇いって一日しか働けない人 for that day.
Day workers?
Day workers. Yeah, so they moved against the destruction of the place for day workers.
One last question before we unfortunately have to go. It's a shame it's such a brief time, but so it's not direct from the question, not directly related to Osugi, but you mentioned Ito No as one of the influential anarchist feminists. Is there a strong anarcho-feminist current in Japan?
中西、短くフェミニストっている、なんかアナルコフェミニストって日本で理論家
日本の理論家、今は、今いるグループはそれこそ中村さんとかのこう一点が、まあ、頑張って。
もっとでかい人みたいな。
田中光田中光
There's Tanaka, yeah. And
一般的にフェミニズムってどういう状態？
I mean, generally speaking, in Japan, anarcho-feminism is not so like developed or mainstream. So yeah, I think the major issue in Japan, Japanese anarchism, I think.
So tight on time, but before we do let you go, what are the hopes for Sasazuka Collective? Sorry about that. What are your hopes in the coming year? What would you folks like to do?
Yeah, our group is just newly formed, and we are going to create a commune in Tokyo, and yeah, so that's the general project of us. And yesterday we did like demonstration against Japanese government. Yeah, direct action we did yesterday.
So a mixture of direct action and setting up a commune. That sounds really promising, and I look forward to hearing much more about your work over the next coming years.
Thank you.
Building stronger relations between our two communities. I'm afraid I'm going to have to say goodbye and move it on, but I hope we get to speak to you again, and we can make a longer thing of it at the 2021 London Anarchist Bookfair. Take care. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, thank you all, and it's nice to meet you.